This crowd rises to its feet. McCullar slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect. Garland one of the lane, locked to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including Bally Sports Ohio without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. The NBA draft is just a week away. We are going to find out what changes are coming to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are still without a head coach. Turns out Kobe Altman, man of his word, said at the press conference that they may not have a coach until the draft. We will find out how close to the draft that decision is made. Joining me today, though, is my co-host Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's so nice to finally get to talk draft with someone who actually knows what they're talking about and hasn't read 3 scouting reports and watched a few scout videos, but actually has done any amount of legitimate work on the subject.
Yeah, it is very helpful, and we are going to do today the opposite of what I would have done in high school, which is when I'm cheating off of somebody's notes, I would not be bringing that to the attention of the public. But we have been cheating off the notes of Maxwell Baumbach from the No Ceilings podcast. Maxwell, thank you so much for joining us and being the expert these two dummies so sorely need.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me. I'm so excited to be here. Love talking draft year round. So now that we're finally here, it's like coronation day for a lot of these guys. I love getting to see players live their dreams, hear their name called on draft night. And I think the Cavs are in such an interesting position as a franchise going forward. I'm really excited to talk about fits for them at 20.
Yeah,
it's a weird position.
Yeah, I think before we jump into any analysis, can you please plug the No Ceilings draft guide?
Yeah. So NoCeilingsNBA.com, we put out a draft guide every year. It's only $12, 60 full scouting reports. Our partnership with Synergy Sports allows us to put really interesting advanced statistical data in there, so you can kind of see how guys function and how efficient they are at different play types, which is really helpful. We have player comparisons, scouting reports on our top 60 prospects in the draft. So whether you want to get like super deep in the weeds, or if you just want to like read a couple paragraphs and see a player comp on guys, we've got you covered. So you can check that out, NoCeilingsNBA.com. We also have daily written work there throughout the entirety of like from when the college basketball season starts up until the draft. And of course, we have our YouTube and podcast feeds as well, where we've got daily content there also.
I really appreciate Carter doing that, because inevitably at some point in this podcast, we're going to say something that gets our listeners to just, unplug, run away from their headphones or whatever the case may be. So getting the plug in at the start rather than the end is a smart way to go. But let's first start with the quality of this year's draft. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about this being a down year for the NBA draft. In my eyes, that typically means the strength of the talent at the top of the draft, but which obviously is not a big concern for the Cleveland Cavaliers picking at 20. Obviously, the top of the draft, there's no clear-cut guys, but how does this post-lotto tier compare to the post-lotto tier in previous years?
I kind of like it. I like it better than I did in, say, like 2022 in some senses. Like I think there's a nice mix of interesting projects that have some sort of strength that give a team something to build upon, and just proven reliable veterans who might not have like the sexiest upside, but have things that they can come in and do right away. So I think kind of whatever you're looking for and whatever your preferred flavor of prospect is, there is something for you in that range. And I also think just because this draft appears as if it will be volatile on paper and there is so much just smoke and uncertainty, there's also like a real chance that somebody that you think will be gone by 12 is still there when the Cavs are picking at 20, which is always really exciting.
I think that's really interesting because, 2022 was the last year that Carter and I really dove into the draft, because that's when the Cavs had a pick. And obviously we took Ochai Agbaji at 14 in that draft. When you say you kind of like it even in comparison to a year like that, is that because you believe that, hey, like they might be lacking a certain skill set or whatever, but they are ready to contribute? Or is it just, hey, like I feel better about their ability to eventually become an NBA player?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, I think there are guys that I'm pretty high on when it comes to like just being functional on an NBA floor out of the gate that are in this range. So you have your sort of like boring veteran prospects, I guess you could call them, where it's like a Kyle Filipowski, a Baylor Shireman, a Kevin McCullar, Jaylen Tyson, Tristan da Silva, Ryan Dunn, if like that's your cup of tea. And then like conversely, you've got some really interesting prospects. You've got guys like Keyonte George, who is like a lights out shooter and passer, but like really got some athletic challenges. Pakum Daddier, who's like not fully functional as far as his playmaking, but plays super hard, has good size, can shoot a little bit, really high work rate, good team defender. Guys like Yves Missi, who can like move his feet really well for a guy his size. Like there's a lot of interesting upside swings that you can take here. But there are also just, if you want to just get a guy who can be on an NBA court and not embarrass himself, you can get that too.
Yeah, I want to just dive in with a big question kind of right off the rip, which is, you know, like as I started doing my initial dive, you know, guys like Furphy come up, guys like Keyonte George come up, guys like Tyler Smith come up. And it seems like in Justin's, you know, pet cat is Daddier, who, you know, and like, you know, like I feel like you have all these wings in that, you know, 6'8" to 6'10" range. Cavs are desperate for help at the three. You know, that's always the position that the fans really care about. And it feels like their range of outcomes is like unbelievably wild. You know,
it is.
Like, someone mentioned Johnny Furphy like as high as 9 on the timeline the other day, and I'm like, you know,
that face kind of says a lot.
Yeah,
there.
I'm like personally lower on Furphy than a lot of
I'm
people,
not I'm not 9 high on him. That's for sure, based on what I've read. And a question that's been bouncing around my head is, if like, are the Cavs in a spot where they really should stay at 20 and get a prospect in that range, or like, is there so much parity in that like 15 to 30 range that if they were to like say, we're asset poor right now, we did our big cash in trade, is this a team that should be looking at trading down?
I would really consider it. Like if New York wanted to give you like 24 and 25, or even like 24 and I think like 35, whatever their second pick is, like I would really consider it, depending on how the board breaks. I think you could be playing with fire a little bit, like just because of how this class is sort of shaped. Like if you are looking for wings and then just like the wings are gone, then you don't want to have to, like, I feel like there is a pretty harsh tier break for me that starts around like 29. Where after that point, it's like, okay, now we're kind of playing with fire a little bit. And there's certain guys that I don't really like as much in this class that I have in that tier that I presume will be off of the board by that like 25 to 36 range. So I think it's worth considering depending on how the board is shaking out. But I think for a team like Cleveland, where you would like some more depth, you need more shooters in general, I don't think it would hurt to get like one more like true blue 5, so to speak, depending on who's there. Like I think that's something that you could explore. Like they've got a couple different options, and if those guys are available, it's something you could do.
Yeah, and with a draft that's kind of murky like this, does it change your philosophy when it comes to how teams should approach their picks? Do you tend to be kind of a best player available guy? How much do you factor fit? Is it a kind of a balance of both?
I do think it is a balance of both. I skew best player available because I think generally what you have to keep in mind is that the expected value of these picks tends to decrease in a pretty meaningful way as you go down the board. So like a lot of times what your average 20th pick is not awesome. So the idea of like, we don't want to draft this guy and then have to worry about like if he's going to be splitting too many minutes. Like if that's the problem, you take that guy. If you're worried like, hey, this guy might eat into somebody else's minutes at 20, you take the guy who might eat into the minutes, because that's a blessing if that player is on the board at 20. But yeah, I generally lead best player available. I do think fit matters to an extent. I think it matters less where Cleveland is picking at 20. I think it would be different if you had to like pick at 1 and then you were like, is Alex Sarr or Donovan Clingan going to overlap with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley? Like I think then it's a different conversation. But I think
players have more expectations about like what their immediate playing time is going to be.
Yes, yeah. Where I think at 20, even if a guy slips there, I think they'll generally be a little bit more understanding of their value to the franchise that is bringing them in.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of starter spots that are spoken for when it comes to the Cavs, at least as currently constructed. But, like you can draft just about any position, and that could be, a valuable rotation player, right? That can open up other opportunities. And even if those opportunities aren't currently there, if you draft a talent that you feel pretty good about, it might, if let's say a guy like Bub Carrington, who, doesn't fit what the Cavs need in terms of a wing, but I think is someone that Carter and I both kind of enjoy as a prospect and would find him to be interesting if he was available there. That might open up trade opportunities of guys that are currently playing that position and coming off the bench to address those other needs. So it is really interesting, and I do think overall best player available is my philosophy, but your level of confidence as an organization that you can provide an environment for this player to hit their ceiling, I think is the ultimate thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you need to consider, where you are as a franchise and then what that developmental plan is going to look like for that player. And if you're not able to meet their needs, I think it's kind of like a used car situation where like the second you drive a prospect off the lot, like the value just sort of decreases in some sense. So I think a lot of times people will be like, oh, well, if we draft this guy because the expectations were that he was going to be this pick, we'll still be able to get something for him later. And I don't think it always works out that way. And I think what a guy like Keon Johnson got traded for after his initial stint is like a good example of that, where it's like, oh yeah, he was like a first round pick. And then when they had to get off and they didn't get much of anything. So I think you have to be careful about it in that sense. Like if you don't have a plan to get this guy on the court, you have to understand that you are going to take a hit if you try to get off of them later.
Yeah, absolutely. But now saying, being open to any position, that's obviously my mentality going into this draft. But top of my priority list is obviously to find a wing. I think that is an area where the Cavs really could use some assistance. We talk about shooting being really important. For me, playmaking is just as important. I think when you look at the Boston Celtics kind of model of success, having guys that can initiate offense at every position was a big part of what they were able to accomplish. And just getting guys that are a little more multifaceted. When you look at kind of this rough range of, let's say, like 15 through 30 of guys that will potentially be there for the Cavs, how does this post-lotto group of wings kind of fit in with a team that has expectations like the Cleveland Cavaliers, where, minutes might not be available at first, but if they've got, if they bring something to the table, they have the opportunity to potentially earn it?
Yeah, so there's three guys that like come to mind immediately when you bring up like those kind of criteria. And it's sort of like these three are sort of like a Goldilocks and the Three Bears, like too hot, too cold, just right kind of thing, where it's like one is more offensive tilted, one's defensively tilted, one's sort of in the middle. So your shooter in this range that I like a lot is Baylor Shireman out of Creighton. So Shireman shot a really high percentage from three basically every season of his college career. He was like over 38, but the volume is always really high. So he's one of those guys where like, you might look at the percentage, be like, 38, 39. Okay, he's a good shooter. But like the difficulty, the volume, and just the types of shots that he hits are NBA threes, which I think is something that's really important as an evaluator, not just to look at the percentage, but in the NBA, if you're like a shooter, you have to take those tough shots, those side steps, over closeouts, all that. Like Shireman can do that. The other thing I like about Shireman is he's a fantastic defensive rebounder. He's pretty strong. He's a little better defensively than the counting numbers would indicate. He's not going to be like a lockdown guy, but I think he will be able to survive because he's thick. He's going to play physically and his usage will be lower at the NBA level. But he's a really good defensive rebounder. He's awesome in transition, both as a shooter and as a playmaker. Like he always has an assist rate over 20, can really just whip the ball to guys. Like he's just sort of tailor-made for like an up-tempo, early offense heavy NBA. And obviously like the game slows down, but in half court, like he has this really good chased off the line passing game. He has the range to floor for other guys. He plays with like a real swagger and confidence. And has gotten like rave personality reviews throughout the pre-draft process. But like also he's just like the best player at the NBA Combine. He is one of those guys when you talk to other prospects in that same range, they all mention him as one of the best guys that they played against this year. He's just a really well-rounded offensive player who should be able to survive defensively given his power.
How much of that is age though? Like, because this is a guy that's the same age as like a Darius Garland.
Yeah. So he is older. He spent quite a bit of time in college. He did use his COVID year. What I will say is he's always been the shooter. The biggest thing for Shireman is that he was a dual sport athlete coming out of high school. So like he wasn't a guy that was fully focused on basketball. And if you look at the improvements that he's made like year over year, I think there is a trajectory that's rather encouraging, that speaks to someone who is going to come in and play right away. Like athletically, if you look at his dunk numbers year over year, he's dunked more and more every single season. So I think that he's like in some sense a late bloomer. He started off at South Dakota State as a sixth man and left as a, star at Creighton in the Big East. So I do think it's age, but I think his developmental curve was slightly different than it was for a lot of other guys.
Yeah, it's funny. And I was getting ready to mention this, and someone in our live stream chat actually already mentioned it. I think Cavs fans have a little bit of like Dylan Windler PTSD.
Sure.
Like, cause
yeah,
like that was
even Abaji, who we talked ourselves into and hasn't really, you know, kind of landed in the NBA.
I would say the biggest difference with Shireman is that he's played a much higher level of competition than Dylan Windler did playing at Belmont in the 2 years that he played at Creighton. And I would say the biggest difference between him and Ochai is just all the gray areas of basketball. Ochai was the low assist rate player. He was not much of a defensive rebounder. His counting numbers were like also pretty disappointing on defense, given the level of athlete that he is.
He wasn't a high stock guy.
No, so like Shireman might not be a high stock guy, but he is going to rebound. He is going to pass. Like he is going to do a lot of other ways. He has a lot of other ways to like impact the game. Where like if you look at Ochai in the season he had this year where the shot wasn't falling and there wasn't any value to be had there. Shireman is a much better bad game player than those guys.
Interesting. I want to flip to the other side of the age spectrum a little bit and talk about Furphy, because Furphy, I feel like in my initial, there's always guys that you watch and you go, oh, they're perfect. And then you kind of start digging a little bit more and you realize they're not quite perfect. But talk to me a little bit about what you think of a guy like Johnny Furphy, who has a great physical profile for a small forward, but there are some warts there.
Yeah, and I would almost like answer back to like he has a great physical profile for a small forward. Like, does he? Like he's
I was about to say.
Like he's 190. He measured with like a 6'8" wingspan. Like he was a guy who was talked about like he was going to be this big long wing, and like the measurements of the combine were kind of disappointing. He plays really hard, which I think is like good and worth something, especially in a young prospect. Like he is a high work rate player. He's moving all the time. He knows how to cut. I'm always leery of when people are like, his value comes from cutting. It's like, well, a lot of guys know how to cut. Like that's not what you want. But like he's relocating off the ball in the perimeter to like get himself open from three. He's not quite a movement shooter yet. I think the hope is that gets there. Defensively, he's pretty good within a team construct, but on the ball, I do not like his hips. He's a bit of a turnstile guarding the ball right now. So my concern with Furphy is I think he's in a position where if the shot isn't falling, he doesn't have like the same passing juice that a guy like Baylor Shireman has, or that same feel. And I think because of where he's at from a physical standpoint, he likes physicality. Like he's not shy of contact. He'll get to the line. He'll charge into people. But I worry about him getting sort of hunted and bossed and pushed around at the NBA level. The other thing is he does not get to the basket on his own. He shot this really high percentage at the rim this year, but very little of that was self-created. So per Bartorvik, he took 55 shots at the rim. 81% of those were assisted. So this is not a guy who like takes a closeout and just like pump fakes and blows by. Like he generally does not get to the rim unless it is off of a cut, which I worry about his handle like quite a bit.
Where do you have him on your board? Do you have him near the bottom of the first?
Yeah, so I've got him like late first, early second is like more where I see him. Like I just think he's a bit of a project. I think if you're
such
a team
crazy range of outcomes,
that likes, like if you're a team that like if you love the personality and you think he can get stronger and you really buy the shooting and you think he's going to be a movement guy, his tape actually reminded me of Ben Shepherd's junior year at Belmont tape quite a bit, which like normally people talk about Furphy as if he's more of like a power forward kind of guy, at least in the draft circles. But like, I think that is like more the vision. Like, I think the vision is more of like, can you be this interesting high work rate movement shooter that like learns how to defend within a team? Yeah.
Like that's what I think interesting to me about Furphy is like the Cavs have just been making do in the non-LeBron years for literally 20 years now, without, true small forwards. Like it's always a lot of these kind of like, Strus is a forward, but he's, a little smaller, and, Okoro
Alonzo
6'5",
G.
Alonzo G. An army of 6'5" guys who work well. And then you see this, like, to me, Furphy is nothing but a small forward, like an off-ball kind of player that, that can fill the wing, be a transition attacker. But like, the more you do kind of explain kind of those limitations, it does make sense why you wouldn't be so sure. And like, you look at the tape and I feel like the jumper looks really nice, but then it's 35%. It's not like he shot the cover off the ball.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I just don't feel like there's a ton of margin for error with him if the shot isn't going in.
Yeah, and this ties into what we talked about on our last podcast, where I was saying that the Cavs kind of had too many guys that are in defined roles of like, you are a play initiator, you are a play finisher, and I'd like to get a little bit more dynamic. And like, as much as I can appreciate, guys that can cut off ball and take advantage of great assists, like I want someone that can generate on their own. But, being a smart off-ball player like that can fit into an offense with structure if you can take advantage of those great assists that you get, just like we take advantage of the great assists we get from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. We need to get back to your Goldilocks philosophy here, Maxwell. So was Furphy one of the other ones?
He was not. He was not. I actually went all kind of older guys with these three. So the other one is on the defensive side is Kevin McCullar. McCullar is very polarizing. He was a guy who is sort of like projected near the lottery at points early in the year. He was a defensive specialist. He spent a couple years at Texas Tech, transfers up to Kansas. Sort of a do everything Swiss Army knife kind of player, like comfortably guards up and down the lineup, good stock rates over the course of his career, good defensive rebounder. Again, a really good playmaker, like very, very nice handle, very good chase off the line, pretty slithery. Okay athlete who's had a lot of injuries. His career 3-point percentage isn't great, but he shot really well on like corner threes, unguarded threes, and then his overall percentage and volume actually profile like well for a forward in their final pre-draft season. So he kind of has this non-shooter label that I think he was able to shed a little bit this year. I think with McCullar, it's kind of like a medicals thing. Like if the medicals are good, I think you're all over this guy. He is very like, everyone's comparing players to guys who did well in the playoffs, but like there is some Josh Hart to his game as far as just like his fingerprints are all over the game all the time. I just finished an article that's going to go up on No Ceilings Plus this weekend about guys who are returning starter value that are subpar NBA shooters, and McCullar checks every single one of those boxes. He's a high usage college player who generates a ton of assists, rebounds, and stocks. Like he is a very, very well-rounded player. It's just a matter of like, is he going to be healthy?
Now, is that a guy that you would feel like is a reach for the Cavs at 20? Or
I don't think so. So his positioning on boards dropped quite a bit after his last injury that he had, which was like a bone bruise. Like it wasn't like he tore his ACL for the 9th time. It's more like he's been snake bitten and banged up than like it's the same knee 5 times. Like it's not that with McCullar. If you talk, the people that I've talked to in NBA circles at least make it just sound like this guy's just had a lot of different injuries.
Yeah,
this
again,
is like
the PTSD is kicking in.
Cavs fans are freaking out right now.
Yeah, that's all right. I get it. But yeah, I think if you look at the overall like trajectory that he was on before he missed March Madness, and then people dive into, guys tape late in the year and then they're rising up. I think I wrote an article about it, but I think people just forgot about Kevin McCullar and like how good and impactful he was for Kansas this year.
Well,
now this was probably an important question to ask on the front end, but the No Ceilings draft guide, is it a ranking?
It is in order of the last board that we've done. So it is in order of like our June board, essentially.
Okay, good. Because I hadn't noted with some of these guys kind of where they rank. And, I was just curious for that because that's obviously someone that you don't see as high in boards. And I was just really interested to hear how much of a reach it would be to go for a wing that's maybe, mocked currently in the low 30s. But it seems to me that you're at least implying that it's all kind of a very similar tier, even though you do feel that there's a bit of a drop off after 29.
For sure. Yeah. And like I have McCullar firmly in this tier.
Okay.
Like on my current board, I have McCullar at 18. Like I
Wow.
think I think if you believe in the health, I think Kevin McCullar is like for sure an NBA player.
Interesting. That's it's not a guy I've really looked at, but I do think what jumps out to me is the kind of the hands in every play vibe. You know, I think
the motor is off the charts.
I think an issue that the Cavs have had with their role guys over the last couple of years is a tendency when the machine isn't working well for them to just kind of exist on the court, you know, to have some of these, you know, like that's kind of been the gripe, you know, from Isaac Okoro skeptics is like, you know, a lot of 30-minute 7-point 1 rebound 2 assist games, and you know, so a guy who like is kind of all over the box score, all over the floor, and making these kind of loud plays. I think there's probably a little bit of shortage of loud plays in the Cavaliers role guy room, you know. So that's very interesting to me. I did want to ask you about another guy that you know some would call a wing, but I'm not sure I would. And I'm pretty low on this particular prospect that a lot of people think might be a very good fit for the Cavs. Can you sell me on Tristan da Silva?
I'm not like the biggest da Silva guy. Like I think Tristan da Silva is fine. Like I think he is a guy who will be around the league for a long time because he's like 6'9" with an okay wingspan, and he just really knows how to play basketball. He's a good shooter, like always over 38%. Really knows how to move without the ball. He got a lot better at moving without the ball. Defensively, good within a team concept. My issue with him has always just been physicality. I'm a big physicality guy. Like the guys that I like are like big, tough, and move people around. Like that's just generally a part of my draft philosophy. If you look at the playoffs, like generally you don't see a lot of guys that are weak for their position that are on like the best teams. He can get driven through quite a bit, and he has a hard time like maintaining his line when he drives to the basket. It's a lot of like, I'm attacking a closeout and now I'm getting bumped and I'm taking sort of like an off balance floater instead of getting right to the rack. Like there's a little bit of that to his game. Where I think if you're a team that needs just like a ninth man who can come in and like be stable, like he's not going to be a negative. Like I just don't think he's going to be terrible. I just don't know physically like how much more juice there is to squeeze. And that's
concerning to me that shows up on college tape, because this is a guy that's the same. He's the same guy. Yeah, he's the same age as Isaac Okoro and Evan Mobley, right? Like it's, you know, when you see older prospects, you sometimes wonder, hey, are they succeeding because they have a little bit more of a grown man body compared to their peers? And if, you know, a guy playing at Colorado looks like he's getting bumped around a little bit at 23 years old, it does give me a little bit of pause. Yeah, and I just can I, because it feels like I see the comp I see thrown out with him a lot is like a Cam Johnson type, but like a less athletic. I don't feel like Cam Johnson has like a lot of margin for error as a 3 or 4 athletically to be a little less athletic than Cam Johnson. Like I just don't see where the ceiling is with him.
I also think that Cam Johnson, like it's really important to remember how good of a shooter Cam Johnson was coming out. Like Cam Johnson was a career 40.5% from 3 on 10.6 attempts per 100 possessions. Da Silva's 38.6 on 6.8 per 100 possessions. And that number went up year over year. He was at 8.2 this past season, but he's more of like an above average 3-point percentage guy on above average volume and not like a sniper. And if you're not going to be a sniper, I need more of that like inside the arc downhill stuff. And I just don't quite think he has it.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. Have we touched on your third guy in this Goldilocks conundrum?
So my third guy, are you guys familiar with Jaylen Tyson out of Cal?
Yes, a little bit, but not as much as I'd like to be.
So Tyson, he had like kind of an adventure through college, had sort of an auspicious start where he was at Texas for like 2 weeks and then transferred out to Texas Tech. Texas Tech, he transferred out. There was like a scandal with the coach there where it was like, he was right to transfer out. So like the 3-time transfer knock on him, I don't think is like quite fair because the Texas Tech situation had to get out of there. He was awesome at Cal this year. So if you look at Cal's record, it's like, this team wasn't very good, but look at their record in Pac-12 play. Like once Jaylen Tyson got to just like be the guy for them, and they were actually above average in Pac-12 play. And it's because of Jaylen Tyson. They had to run everything through him offensively. I cannot stress enough how deficient in talent the rest of this roster was for a power conference school. Jaylen Tyson has a deep bag. Like he's got this blend of, I always say, modern athleticism and old man funk, where like he will get downhill, he will put you on a poster, but he's also going to do some like dad stuff to create space in the mid-range and like throw his body and shoulder into you to get a little bit of space to get off a tough jumper. But he's always been a really good catch and shoot player. Defensively, it's kind of up and down. The tape this year wasn't great, but his usage was outrageous. He had like a 32.8 usage rate or something like that. It was really, really high. But at Texas Tech, the stock numbers were really high when he was more complimentary. And he also shot over 40% from three in that season at Texas Tech when the usage was lower. He's got a little bit of playmaking juice to him. Sometimes throw some passes where like, I wish he'd take that one back. But also just throw some absolute darts to people that are like really impressive and show some advanced vision and fluidity as a decision maker. Jaylen Tyson's like a little bit of everything between the physicality, the shot, the passing, the playmaking. Like, is there a world where like maybe it's just like not good enough and that's that? Like potentially. But I always feel so much better about the guys who I've seen do a lot of stuff. And then I'm like, all right, let's pare that down. Like, let's cut out the mid-range stuff. Let's just go straight to the rim or shoot the three. And then let's take some more of that focus and put it back on defense like it was at Texas Tech.
Yeah, he's definitely someone that I've kind of had highlighted just because he brings that kind of vision and brings that playmaking. Again, I think versatility is more important than any individual skill set because I do feel the Cavs have shooters. Like, I feel like we actually have a good amount of shooting talent on this roster, and it's just, can we generate easier looks for guys? And can everyone benefit kind of from that? When it comes to Tyson, though, my one question is he a big two or is he someone that you can see playing the three?
I think because he's so strong, he could play the three.
Okay.
Like he's only like 6'5" with a 6'8" wingspan, but he's like 220. Like
okay.
he's very strong and he plays very strong.
Yeah, because I've seen him listed anywhere from 6'5" to 6'7", so I wasn't quite sure where that kind of came out.
Yep. Yeah. The overall like height and like wingspan measurements work great, but between the athleticism and the power, I think he can play the three.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting guy, and like I like that you kind of called out like, hey, he wasn't always making perfect passes, but like he saw some crazy ones, and I always kind of give college guys a little bit of a bit of credit, like I remember obviously not the same tier of prospect, but I remember when Ant Edwards was coming out, there was a lot of like the assist to turnover ratio was not good, the playmaking numbers were not good, but I was like, I watched that dude make some crazy passes, that bad players don't see, and like so I do think you should get some credit for like having the vision to try the stuff, even if your hit rate wasn't 100%.
Yeah, and like Keyonte George was a guy I was too low on last year because I got too hung up in the mistakes, but then like the highlights were unreal. And like he was a guy where like he put in the work and really kind of pared it down and thought, okay, let's dig into the tape and see which ones I want to not do and which ones make sense and whatever. Like I do think with prospects, the flashes matter a lot.
Yeah,
especially when it comes to passing.
And George, honestly, is probably someone that has kind of moved up to the top of my wish list. Like when I'm looking at guys for the Cavs, because again, shooting, handle, playmaking, like all that kind of stuff is there. And I understand, he's got to improve his finishing at the rim and he's got to get stronger and whatnot. Yeah. But can you kind of elaborate on where you're at on him as a prospect? Because he kind of checks those boxes that really kind of interest me.
Yeah, so I have these four guys actually right in a row in the order that we've talked about them. So that's kind of nice. It's like 17, 18, 19, 20.
I did it on purpose. Trust me. I'm just that good.
So Keyonte George is fascinating to me. I do have these guys within a tier. I may actually still move them around a little bit before my final board. I'm not completely married to these rankings. Who knows? But he is like, he's got a laser from 3-point range. Like he is an exceptional shooter. Pull up, off the catch, NBA, like it's all there. The playmaking stuff is kind of funky, like make some really advanced reads, but they're all sort of from the perimeter, which is interesting. He does not get downhill very often. Rarely
is that a frame or a handle thing?
I don't think it's the handle. I think the handle is actually like kind of nice. It's a foot speed thing. Like he moves kind of like Kyle Anderson. Like the comp I've made is like you're hoping for Cam Johnson and Kyle Anderson's body, which is like a weird like comparison. Like it's like you mash the two together and like it's like when you take two foods that you don't normally see together and you're like, this might be really good, this might be terrible. Like I really don't know what the end result of this is going to be. So I like on paper, he's an exceptional shooter. He can really dribble. He can make some really cool passes. But then there is also the fact that like he just does not get to the rim very often because he's pretty slow footed and like the finishing is sort of subpar and he's a little bit older for a freshman. It's a little bit eye of the beholder. If he had like more of a mid-range game, it would probably be a little bit easier for him. But like his pull-up mechanics in space aren't as good. And I think it's because he doesn't get off the floor that quickly. He doesn't have that change in direction. His speed changes are just so muted because he's not going that fast to begin with. That it's not like he can like go fast and like slam on the brakes and he's got like the space to just pop. Like he doesn't have that. So
sounds like me in high school.
Yeah. So it's
I was all about the
decel.
Yeah, it just was a lot of decel with no like acceleration.
Yeah. But yeah, like he made like 56.5% of his unguarded threes and was guarded on 52 of his 75 catch and shoots and was still like a 40+% 3-point shooter. Like he is an unbelievable shooter and he's 6'8". The stock numbers were solid. Like defensively, he's a guy who's going to have to learn to play that like just throw your body on him kind of style because he is strong enough. But like the more reliant on his feet that he's going to be, the worse he's going to be. But that field, like the playmaking, like he knows where to be off the ball. His ground coverage is a little better than you might think. With the 6'10" wingspan, he does eat up enough space pretty well. Like I think defensively he'll probably be okay. I just don't know like how the offense manifests itself because he's not quite big enough to be a guy who gets open for threes by screening, and he's not quick enough to be a guy who gets open from threes by coming off of them. So it's like, what is this? Like, are you just going to be parked in the corner? Or are you too easy to guard then? Like, he's perplexing. I don't quite know.
He sounds like a funky player that could thrive kind of in the funky setup that the Cavs have. Like when you talk about like the defensive coverage that Evan Mobley and Jared Allen are able to provide, when you talk about, the pressure they kind of put on the rim as, guys in the short roll and in the dunker spot and what Darius and Donovan can create, like, I can see them covering up for some of those limitations. But again, if you're coming in off the bench and you're playing with the second unit, how you fit with the starters is nice, but that's probably not going to be kind of the roster configuration and where you're going to be in the rotation.
Sure.
Man, what a weird guy, And like, the counting, does it matter to you like that the counting stats are like never that good with him?
That's the other thing that is scary. He's a guy who averaged like 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists. And like generally the guys that have that just aren't good. Like, and there's your exceptions. Like Derek Lively didn't have good accounting numbers. You know what I mean? But with Derek Lively, Derek Lively was a pretty obvious like eval to me where it's like, yeah, this guy's giant. He rolls to the rim. He's really good at the stuff he's going to be asked to do. And that makes him really easy to plug in. Where with I don't know. Like, I guess the example would be like, what if you weren't sure if Derek Lively was going to be able to roll to the rim in the NBA? You know what I mean? Where it's like the way that he went about his business, it was very obvious that like, this is the role that Derek Lively can play. Where with Keyshawn, it's like, I know what skills he has. I'm just not sure how he gets to the point to put them on display on an NBA floor. So I would feel much better about him if he was the guy that like dominated. And then I could say, yeah, he, instead of scoring 16, he's just going to pare down the shot diet, score 7, and it's all gravy. But that's not the case. Miami was also like a pretty bad and like ball stoppy team. And I do wonder that if you put him like on UConn, like I think the numbers would look a lot better. So I think there's that to be the argument to be made, but it's definitely scary.
Let me tell you, Maxwell, it is very different. Cavs fans are so not used to drafting in this range, by the way. We're used to either being like 1 to 5 or like 29 to 30 or not having a pick at all. Like that has been so our experience. So let me tell you, being at 20 is a lot in this draft is a lot different than being at 14 2 years ago.
And honestly, we still
you got to be okay with.
We suck at being fans of a team in this range too. That's like not an instant contender. Like it's all new, scary, and exciting. I'm not someone that likes change, so I feel like I'm fighting for my life at all times here. Help us out on a guy I think Carter and I are both interested in Tyler Smith. First of all, is he a big or is he a forward?
I'm a Tyler Smith stockholder.
Yeah, I think both of us are into him.
So I wrote an article about Tyler Smith around like March or so, and I was really high on Tyler Smith. And then that weekend, I watched the Ignite. They were in Chicago. I went and saw him play the Windy City Bulls, and he played like I was like, oh no, I can't believe I just wrote the I Love Tyler Smith article like right after. And then I watched this game. Like, I think he has to be a forward because the rim protection instincts are very bad right now. Like, he will occasionally make a nice rotation at the rim and block a shot. But when they were playing him at the 5 with Ignite, like, it was a disaster. So like, I think if you're taking him, you think that maybe that's something aspirational that he can get to down the road. I don't think it's something that you are like counting on happening on the rookie contract at all. What I will say about his defense is that when he is like on smaller players or their forwards and he sits down in his chair, he can be really tough to beat. So like the idea of, oh, if he's just a forward, is there value there? I think there can be. I think there are just some like overarching field concerns still defensively about like rotations, where to go, like communicating out screens, like that stuff needs to come along. He needs to talk more, needs to be a little bit more just on top of everything that's happening all the time. The offensive feel I like quite a bit. He's a really good shooter for his height at his age, and he is a guy who knows what he is and what he isn't. Good cutter, rolls hard to the rim, can finish above the rim, moves off the ball if his shot is not there, and shoots a lot of wide open shots. Like, he is very good at that. I thought his handle when they put him in like zoom action stuff was solid enough, and he started to get more assertive, like taking those mid-range looks when they were there. I like the offensive profile a lot with Tyler Smith. I think it just becomes how do you feel about getting the defensive stuff up to speed? And if you're a team like the Cavs, like, do you have the patience for that? Like, the 4 and 5 defensively are so important that like maybe with Allen and Mobley behind him, you guys feel a little bit better about it and you're willing to rep that out. I think it just kind of comes down to that with them.
So I want to ask you a big question. This is a big comparison, but like I can't shake it. And it's like, so we have the 6'10" dude, pretty good athlete, not a crazy, lateral athlete, but like good vertical pop, and highly touted high school recruit. He was like, top 5 in his class, I think I want to say I read, or something near it. And then has kind of an unconventional first year out of high school. What is different from him as a prospect and a guy like Michael Porter Jr. as a prospect, who was like a no doubter, like top 2 guy before he got hurt? Like, I don't see why there's such a huge gulf between these two as prospects.
Michael Porter Jr.'s overall scoring was so much more polished. Like, the overall like handle and ability to get to his spots in the mid range, like, Tyler Smith is more eater than chef. Like, he is much more like, I've got the ball, I'm open, I'm going to take this shot, or like, I'm going to do a one dribble pull up, whatever. Where like Michael Porter Jr. could really make people dance and put the ball on the ground and create his own shots off the dribble. Where like Tyler Smith, I don't know that that's something that's ever going to be there. My like aspirational, like super high end outcome for him would be somebody like Lauri Markkanen, who I dug into the Lauri tape for the article that I did. And like, Lauri had so many of the same flaws, especially defensively, but even offensively. Like, they did like the same like stutter step, first step thing off the line that like muted their overall explosiveness that they have. That's like really impressive for a guy their size. I think that's kind of what you're shooting for with him, is can he be this like second side shooter with like some real downhill aggression? Can we just like really put him in a position to maximize what that first step looks like and have him aggressively charge when that shot isn't there?
So I'm going to make a more I'm going to make a more down to earth comparison.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we've talked about for a few years now is when the Cavs don't have Dean Wade, they really miss Dean Wade.
Yeah.
And this feels like a guy that can kind of give you a little more juiced version of Dean Wade, where like, as much as people talk about the fit of the two bigs, reality is those guys play 18 minutes together, and there's 30 minutes when they're being staggered. So having a guy that can play as that kind of stretch 4, that, he is able to sometimes provide some rim help, although he needs a lot of work. But he can kind of play with that staggered Jared Allen or Evan Mobley, stretch the floor, attack the basket. Like, to me, that's a major need for the Cavs. Like, they really need to kind of get something rock solid there, because as much as Dean Wade's been helpful, it's 3 years in a row now that we're saying, hey, if we had a healthy Dean Wade, that would have made a difference. So I think that's why I really like Tyler Smith. I don't view him as a 3 at all, but I view him strictly as a 4 at this point.
Yes.
Like, you are a power forward, and you can bring something that the Cavs desperately need at that position.
Your vociferous yes makes me think you agree with that, but I do want to ask, can he play the 3 in a Cavs context?
We get funky.
That's the thing.
The
is like you guys did it with Laurie. Like, I don't see why you couldn't. I think it would be worth a shot if you refine the on-ball defensive technique enough. I think you could do it. Like, I think it's attainable. But yeah, I think Dean Wade's a good comp, like Trey Lyles, like Bobby Portis, like those are other guys I've kind of thought about within that similar kind of mold as him. Bobby Portis just had like a really bad defensive season, so like hopefully he's not that. But like I think he's in that kind of mold, and I think like the Dean Wade value play, if you wanted to like buy into the second round, is PJ Hall out of Clemson. Is like very, very Dean Wade to me.
That is deeper than we've gone in this draft.
Yeah, we ain't even close there. I did want to ask one more Tyler Smith question, which is why is he so low? Like, why? Like, because this draft isn't that good. Like, why isn't I'm seeing him in the second in a lot of mocks, and I'm like,
ESPN has him at 33 right now.
Why should he be 14 spots lower than Keyonte George, who didn't produce playing against worse quality competition, same age? Like too good. Like why is there that gulf right now?
I think teams are really hung up on the defense with him. I think like that's one part of it. I think the other part of it is they are hung up on the defense and the idea of him being a 4-5 and not just looking at him as a 4. Like, I think this happens with guys all the time where like people have an idea of what a prospect is going to be. They're not that thing. And then they're still getting judged on like the old criteria a little bit. Like, I think there's some of that going on with Tyler Smith.
I see that a lot with the Cavs.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with some of the Ignite guys is I think, and this isn't like their fault necessarily, but I do think there is something of an opinion that because the Ignite was such a mess this year, that I don't think there was the same, like, I guess I would say overall effort as far as helping get these guys up to speed that there had been in the past, where like I think they're all kind of viewed as like having less polish, just because like the vet group wasn't the same as it had been in years past. Like Pujetter got hired by the Trailblazers, like he was super instrumental in like kind of guiding those guys along, like getting them up to speed on terminology, getting them super comfortable and acclimated with what a professional basketball lifestyle looks like. I think there's been some talk that like that hasn't been there as much with the Ignite guys this year. I can't really speak to that too much. Like, I know that Corey Tillaba on our team did a film session with Tyler Smith and liked him a lot. I know a lot of people like personally that have interacted with him think he's just like a pleasant, good kid. I think it's probably over indexing on the defense and the idea of like, well, if he's going to be a 5, the defense is bad. It's like, well, if he's a 4, then it's not as big of a problem. I think it's more that than anything.
It's just jumped out at me because it's like, if this was one of these really deep classes where you have all these guys with like everyone at like 15 to 30 have these really meaningful warts, everyone I start to fall in love with, I go, at some point, and I've had that a little with Tyler Smith, where I'm like, but he's 6'10", athletic, and 19.
Oh, that length. We need some of that. This actually ties into another guy that was playing in the G League, 20 years old, takes 11 threes a game at 37%. How do the wings in this range compare to someone like Emoni Bates, who, is younger than a lot of these prospects? We saw brief times in the NBA where like it was not there. He was not ready to contribute on the NBA level, but where were you at on Emoni in that process? Have you seen any of him in the G League? And how does he kind of compare to some of these prospects that are like, you look at someone like Da Silva, he's 3 years older than Emoni.
Sure. Yeah. So my thing that like I'm still like honestly just trying to figure out as an evaluator is like, what do guys get better at in the G League and what don't they? So it's like, if I like a prospect but I think he's going to spend like a year or two in the G League, like what are the skills that I can count on the G League to develop in a player? And so far, I think like the one for sure thing is like shooting. And I don't know that we've seen like a guy get better at defense in the G League yet. Like, I don't think we've seen the guy where it's like, this is an offensively tilted prospect who spent a couple years in the G League and came up ready to play defense. So like, that's part of my concern with Emoni, as well as just like the overall sort of athleticism. I think the fact that he had like solid stock numbers in the G League is worth something, but he's still just like not a ball mover, not a threat inside the arc, not a guy who goes downhill. So like, I think Emoni is probably somebody that like you would need to have a more internal person's opinion of, as far as just like, well, is like that's the fair. Work right there is like, is the stuff behind the scenes like good? Like, because if he's a guy that's going to like keep working at it, I think anybody that shoots threes at that percentage and that volume could be worth continuing to invest in.
Which is where we've been. We're like, you know what? Like, that shooting at that height is awesome. I saw he tweeted the other day that he's up 20 pounds from where he was at this time last year. So that would be great.
Yeah. So in that case, I'd say probably bring him back. Like, keep doing it.
Maybe,
we're very invested in keeping him there, but like I just was interested from a prospect.
So like, if Emoni was in this draft, where would he go?
After that year spending in the G League, where do you think?
Oh man,
like, let's say he had that season for the Ignite.
Okay, so Emoni Bates, instead of entering the draft last year, plays for G League Ignite.
22 points per game, takes 11 threes at 37%, 6 rebounds, almost 2 stocks.
Yeah.
20 years old.
He's probably in this tier, right? Like
that's because that was my question.
Yeah. I had Emoni like in the mid-second last year, and I think I think if you put him in this year, I don't think that would be unreasonable. I think if you wanted to be like really pessimistic, then you put him in like my tier 4, which is like guys 29 to 42. Like, I think if you're still just like so skeptical of like, is he athletic enough? Is the body going to be such a problem that guys just boss him around and like he's a negative assist to turnover guy? Like, if you want to be more pessimistic, I think you put him there. But I think that sort of shooting on that type of volume, it's like, well, you always kind of want to like kick the tires on that if a guy's taller than 6'6". So
there's two sides to that coin, right? That is one, hey, where would like, you know, Emoni after the season he's had, hey, he's elevated his draft stock relative to some of these guys, but that also is probably a reflection of how ready these guys that the Cavs are going to be choosing between at 20 are at actually contributing, right? Like this is, these are guys that are going to take some time, and you know, even if, you know, they're picked at 20, they might spend some time in the G League. They may be playing with the Charge just to get the minutes.
If they go project, yes. Like, I don't think there is like the like Furphy, Carrington, Daddy, like that sort of contingent. Like Cam Christie, if you want to like throw him in there, like I just don't think those guys are ready for NBA minutes. Like I think physically it will be a problem, and then like skill wise, like they all have like their little various deficiencies that they work out. I'd be very surprised if any of those guys were playing like serious NBA minutes next year.
If this was 4 years ago and it was the Cavs, Daddy would definitely be at the top of my board. Like George is probably that guy for me right now. I just love what Daddy can do. Like, that guy's got
I do too.
Juice.
I like him so much.
All right, elaborate on Daddy just a little bit, because I need to hear this. I hope he goes somewhere where I can root for him and not like the Toronto Raptors.
For sure. So Daddy he measured like a hair under 6'8". The wingspan wasn't great. Like, it was kind of surprising. It was like 6'9". Very hard charging player, like all energy all the time, always moving, really good offensive rebounder, good defensive rebounder, not like the smoothest lateral athlete, but a guy who has good strength for his age and size and can get off the floor. And then offensively, like a genuine 3-level scorer, like was really good at the basket, but also like a 38% 3-point shooter in a pro league at 18 years old, and really good in the mid-range, like a really, really good pull-up shooter. It's a lot of like, I attack left and then go back to my right hand. Like, it's one of those things that, like, if you deep dive the film, it's so predictable, but he has a lot of success with it still. But yeah, like he's a guy that just another like fingerprints all over the game kind of player. And I just love those like 6'7" to 6'9" high motor guys, because like the fail rate on them is so low that like even when they don't work out, they at least kind of hang around the league a little bit. So if I over index on like ranking one of those guys high, it doesn't look as bad as if I miss on a small guard. But I do think there's like real NBA upside with with that because it's just so rare to find guys that are 3-level scorers at that age. Like even if you have your quibble about like, oh well, it's a predictable driving game and like his handle's not that great and assist to turnover was just okay. Like a lot of players have negative assist to turnover at that age, and very few are 3-level scorers who play their tail off like that. So I'm a big fan.
As someone who instinctively wants to buzzkill my co-host, so I do got to ask. He had like 9 blocks all season or something like that. Does that feels like a red flag to me for someone that big?
It sort of is. And it's a weird thing. A lot of the international players this year have really poor block rates. Like Risache, Saloon, like all of them are like, wow, big toolsy, like good defender in theory, like within a team concept, and like none of them block shots. He has a little bit of a term that like when you're in like the draft bubble and like you just notice like players like small tendencies, like I just come up with these terms, and a term I came up with last year was Jaylen Wilson syndrome, where like Jaylen Wilson would always be in position at the basket and never block shots. Like the rim protection was there in the sense like he would get in the way, like he would make the right rotation to the basket, and he would just never block a shot. And Daddier has Jaylen Wilson syndrome. So it's like, and I don't know how fixable that is because like I just don't understand. Like I just don't understand. Like just track the ball with your hands, put your hand where the ball is. Like I don't quite know how to explain it. So like I don't know.
This is me in high school. This is me in high school playing as an undersized 5. I was always there as a rim protector. Now we know why
Justin loves Daddier.
I was never blocking anything.
Projection.
Well, there's also, me being a stats guy, I like to dive into it. I already like thoroughly explained it away to Carter. I'm like, well, he only played 250 minutes. So you take that, you divide those blocks, you multiply that per 36. It's 1.3 blocks per 36. Yeah, that's not terrible. I can live with that.
Dikembe Mutombo out here.
You're getting just a couple minutes here and there. Yeah, you just don't have the rhythm, the timing for the shot block in there. A lot going on there, Carter.
Maxwell, before I know we're probably abusing your time a little bit, but I did want to. We've been living in Wingtown a little bit, and I do want to talk about the bigs because again, I just think if the Cavs love anyone at 20, they probably just need to take them, given where they are, given the warts. If they have someone they just adore, I think they really should consider going for a 5 or a guard, depending on kind of their evaluation. So I want to ask you about 2 bigs who I feel like are kind of on either end of the productivity to like, ceiling spectrum, and Khalil Ware and Duran Holmes.
Yeah.
Can you kind of just give me your breakdown of those 2 guys? Because both of them are kind of stretchy by reputation, but are they really,
Can they shoot? That's bottom line. Can these guys shoot?
So they both had just like bizarre journeys through college. So Duran like came to Dayton as a top 50 high school recruit who was like a skinny, sort of undersized post-up big. And then he sort of like slowly transitioned into being like this face-up playmaking hub to like this year. It got to a point where in crunch time, they were having him bring the ball up the court and running inverted pick and roll. So it's like he is funky and he's improved a lot. So like there's a lot of like, ooh, I like the trajectory here with Duran Holmes. He's also put on a lot of weight over the last couple of years. The measurements aren't awesome. Like he's not super long. He's got like a 7'1" wingspan, like a 9-foot-ish standing reach. So like he is small in terms of like length, wingspan, and like leaping ability for a 5. He's a fluid athlete, but he's not athletic. Like I think the people that like him are more convinced that he's athletic than I am. His movement is okay. I think he's just really smart. Like I think he just knows where to position himself, how to have his feet to maximize every inch of his body that he has.
He's got some sharp elbows too. I saw some tape of him. He's really carving out space.
Yeah. So he's really good at just finding ways to maximize the tools that he has. Really sharp playmaker. I think the shot is a work in progress. I wouldn't count on it like going in on high volume in year 1, but I do like the trajectory of it quite a bit. And it was something that he got increasingly comfortable with. And I like that he's able to like pick and pop into it, and it's not just like totally stationary. With Ware, it's a similar thing. Ware had a really rough freshman year at Oregon after being a really highly touted recruit. There was a lot of motor concerns. I don't think it's the motor. I actually thought he played really hard at Indiana this year, basically averaged a double-double during conference play, like was really good on the defensive glass. It's a lot of little things with Khalil Ware. He rebounds a lot, but he's also got like super long arms and just sort of relies on that. Like he gives up interior position a lot on the glass. Defensively, he's a capable rim protector, but not really a good one. His hands are really low on defense. A lot of the times, the comment that I've made before is that every time he jumps like an 8th grader trying to touch the rim for the first time. Like he really just loads up and then explodes off the floor. And it's like, you're a better athlete than that. Like you can get up so easily. Like there are moments where he gets up easily, and I want to see that all the time. He needs to be refined. But I like the shot a lot with him. I love the touch. I actually like his shot a little bit more than Duran's. But I think defensively, like if I'm a coach, I have a lot more trust in Duran to play consistent fundamental basketball. And I think that's going to go a long way. Where with Khalil Ware, like there are going to be plays that are going to be really frustrating to NBA coaching staffs. But he's a much better athlete and he measures a lot better. So if you can have the stomach for it to say, hey, we're going to coach you through these mistakes, we're going to work on your defensive technique and get you up to speed and make sure you're boxing out, then if you think you can do that, then Khalil Ware should be the guy. But I think if you need immediate productivity, you feel a lot better about what you're getting with Duran Holmes.
If Ware if he just didn't play that year at Oregon, if he came straight out of high school and had this year at Indiana, how much higher is he on the board? Yeah,
that's a great question. And another thing worth noting too is that like with that year, there was a comment when he decided to go back to school that Jonathan Givony made, either like a tweet or an article, where he was like, part of the decision to go back to school for another year was that the intel was like going to be bad. and then like this year, like the intel was actually positive. Like the intel was like, wow, he like worked really hard and got a lot better. So I think if you wipe that too, and it's just like he has this year at Indiana, everything goes fine. He plays hard the whole game. He's early at practice and whatever. We're probably talking about him closer to like 16, 17. And possibly even higher. Like maybe he's a team that you're talking about for the Thunder at 12. If you're convinced that he can do some of that 5 out kind of stuff, like I think you buy him a lot higher instead of having him be more of like a back end first round, like early second kind of guy.
Yeah, he's an interesting cat, and Justin, I'll toss it to you in just a second here. Sorry, but like you do look at him and kind of think like there are like some baby Derek Lively comps where it's like great frame, high recruit, and then just like. The college season just didn't really work for him, but obviously that's a pretty high end outcome. Sorry, Justin, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say when it comes to a big, amending my statement from last week. I'm more into it if there's a real confidence that they can shoot. Because as much as I like Smith's ability to space the floor as a 4 next to Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. If you're a 5, but you can go out there and space the floor, like theoretically, if you just like slam Miles Turner on this roster, like that, it's still the skill set. The skill set is what's needed. And, in particular, when I'm thinking of fits with Evan Mobley, like I want someone that can, go protect the rim so he can be a roamer when he's out there. I think that's what makes him so special defensively. And if you got a 5 that can space the floor, that gets me really, really excited because you can kind of invert what their roles are on offense. And obviously, Filipowski's another guy that kind of comes with that shooting potential. Where are you at on him? Because I believe he was 20th.
I like him a lot.
Yeah.
So I Filipowski 16. Like I have him as like the top guy in this sort of tier where it's like I don't think there's like a super, super high end outcome that's going to be on the table for him, but I think he's going to be really solid. Like there's just not a lot of guys that are 6'10" that have his level of ball skills. Like he can shoot. Like I buy the shot entirely with him. When you look at other bigs coming out of college in terms of where he's at just from volume and percentage, like stellar. Really like to see that. But just his downhill game is awesome. Like he has really got some wiggle and some like live dribble downhill stuff that you just don't see in bigs that age very often. The defense I worry about a little bit. Like I think his understanding and positioning is generally pretty good. Bigger guys are just really tough for him right now. Like there was a game where they played Baylor and like Yves Missi just kind of like pushed him around. There was obviously the NCAA tournament game where like DJ Burns pushed him around. Like DJ Burns pushed a lot of guys around and whatever. That was his thing. But I think with Filipowski, it's the lineups where he can play the 5 are going to be a little bit limited out of the gate. Like you have to play him at the 5 against teams where it's like Chet or like another like skinnier big who's not going to punish him on the interior. Where if you're like playing against a team that has Jonas Valanciunas out there, like for whatever team he's on, then it's like, well, maybe we need to play him at the 4. Like that's not going to go great.
So you
Two
mentioned
things for you. Sorry, Carter. This is too important to let you talk. I looked at the comps there on the No Ceilings draft guide, and the first two, Kelly Olynyk and Mo Wagner.
Yeah.
Does he make dirty plays? Because as a Cavs fan, that really concerns me.
We hate these guys.
We hate these dudes.
Yeah. He a little bit, not like bad. Like, he's not Grayson Allen. He's not Grayson Allen, but like he's definitely like sort of moody on the court. Like some people have like knocked him for that. Like I think he's slid in recent months, and I think a lot of it is just like people don't like that he's just sort of like pouty and angry out on the court. Like that's the thing. Like old school scouts are bothered by. He's a Duke guy. Yeah, okay. He's a Duke white guy. Like that's what he is. So through and through, like it's what he was destined to be. But yeah, I think he's got a little bit of that in him, but he's not outrageously dirty.
How do you differentiate between him and Tyler Smith? Guys, similar size, similar skill sets. Where do you fall on that?
The polish is just night and day in Filipowski's favor right now. Like Filipowski is just so much more advanced as a ball handler, passer. I wouldn't say he's a shooter, but I would say defensively, like technique wise, he's so much further ahead.
So if the Cavs needed a 4 and both are on the board, I would go
Filipowski. Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to ask, because you mentioned the ball skills as like a major plus, but if he's not quite physically ready to play the 5 in a lot of matchups, does the value of the ball skills get muted at the 4? Where it's like he's great at the 5 as a ball skills guy, but just okay at the 4. Is that kind of the downside for him?
I think there's definitely a little bit of that. Like, I always think that's like so important to acknowledge. I think like that conversation that like that point that you brought up, and then like when people talk about like point guards that are below average 3-point shooters, it's like, well, for the position you have to hit this threshold. So it's like, well, if you're going to be a 4, the ball handling skills have to be really good. I'm a big buyer in what Filipowski can do off the bounce. Like 2.8 assists per game this last year, an 18.4 assist rate. Like those are like sort of wing playmaking numbers. I think because he's as tall as he is, like the handle is always going to be a little bit high, which like is tricky. But I don't think it's going to be a problem. Like, I don't think it's going to be something that's untenable, but it's probably less than ideal.
That's fair. That's fair. You have been so generous with your time. We really appreciate it. I'm enjoying the hell out of this podcast
so much.
But before we get you out of here, we're going to get yelled at if we don't ask about these guys, because, you know, we've talked about the wings, we've talked about the bigs. Now, there's 2 guards that are kind of mocked in that range in both Bub Carrington and Isaiah Collier. I think Collier's probably going to go ahead of them. That would be my guess. But Bub in particular is someone that I think Carter and I both find to be interesting, you know, as a kind of third guard potential coming off the bench for the Cavs. Where are you at on Bub?
I'm lower on Bub, and like I want to like be crystal clear. If someone in this class makes me look stupid, it will be Bub. Like a lot of really smart people love Bub. Like Sam Vecini loves Bub. I know Corey on our team at No Ceilings loves Bub. Like they have him top 10. I really struggle with his shot diet. He lives on tough shots, and like he was a really good mid-range scorer in college. I worry about how it scales up because I don't think he's a very good athlete. I think he has a really hard time separating. He doesn't quite have like the burst or power to get downhill all the way. Like very few of his shots came at the rim. The volume from through is really good, which is a great indicator for next level shooting for freshmen one and dones, even if their 3-point percentage wasn't great. So I think you have to give him some leeway there. But overall, I just don't think he's good enough at putting the ball in the basket for me. He had like a 0.9 BPM in 12 games against top 50 opponents this past year. Like he just doesn't have a lot of ways to affect the game. I think the defense is really bad. Even if his measurements are okay. I just don't really see it with Bub. Like I know it sounds weird. I think there's like paths for him to be like slow Kobe White is a comp. Like I've heard like almost like Gary Harris is a comp for him. Is like he can be like this sort of like off ball scorer who like does some playmaking stuff. Like I think there are for sure paths for him to have a good career. Like with the feel, I almost wonder if there's like a shooting Sean Livingston like kind of outcome for him, like late career Sean Livingston. Like I wonder if that's something that could be on the table for him. I think there are avenues to success if he does really shoot it. I'm personally just lower given the overall efficiency and the physical issues. Like, I think he's going to have to spend a lot of time in the G League, and I don't know that the G League like helps him fill out the areas of his game that he needs to.
That's fair. He's a guy that would be interesting if the Lakers took him, because you miss shots at the rim in a Lakers jersey and you're going to get to the free throw line, so maybe that helps with those rim finishing numbers. Carter, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to actually add something substantive and not just complain. I did. It's funny. I was watching Bob, and I'm an Ohio Bobcat, Maxwell, and I was seeing a little bit of the Jason Preston vibe of the the 6'6", 6'5", big playmaker. I mean, I saw Carrington ran 13 pick and rolls a game, which is like near the top of the league or top of the nation. In terms of volume and, really nice playmaking chops, but you're right. He doesn't get to the rim. How much do you, and as someone who does not watch a second of regular season college basketball, I was told Pitt's offense was pretty chunky. Like, it wasn't the best environment to play in. How much do you think that factors into, like maybe if he played with in more open personnel, things could be a little better, easier for him? What do you think about that?
I think Pitt's offense was a little bit better than it gets credit for. They were 24th in the nation in 3-point attempts and 87th in percentage. They had Blake Hinson, who was like one of the top 3-point shooters in the country. He took like 8 a game and made 42% of them, and is like a fun Exhibit 10 two-way kind of guy in this draft. But they also had like Jalen Lowe, who's another playmaker. They have Guillermo Diaz-Graham, who's like this sort of stretch big. Ishmael Leggett was like another playmaking guard who can shoot. Zach Austin will take deep threes. They didn't go in this year, but he hit him in the past, and is a dynamic lob threat. Federico, who's got an awesome name, was like a stellar rim rolling finisher. I think their offense overall was pretty good, and I think that's part of me not liking him as much as I was kind of a Blake Hinson guy. I liked Zach Austin as a guy who could maybe eventually get there, and now I don't think that's going to happen. But I think that there is a good amount of talent around him to the point where I'm not comfortable using that as an excuse to bump him up. Fair.
And by the way, another Jason Preston amalgam, growth spurt guys. They were both small and grew really late.
So that's the one thing that I also catch myself on with Bub, is that part of me liking guys like Ben Shepherd, Jalen Williams, and Dalton Connect so much was they were all late growth spurt guys, and Leonard Miller was a late growth spurt guy. I really went to bat for him, and it hasn't quite happened yet for him, but I do think there is something to that. I think the developmental curve just straight up is different when you grow later than other guys. I think that is a really important thing to mention that is working in Bub's favor.
Well, good thing that Jason Preston's going to take off this year. I believe in it.
I hope so. I love that
Jason Preston.
Such a fun game too.
Oh man, he was fun to root for as a Bob Kitty. Probably our last NBA prospect in the NIL era.
Well, speaking of fun, this has been a ton of fun. Maxwell, thank you so much for coming on. Before we get you out of here, anything you want to plug? Obviously, guys, if you've been enjoying this podcast, go spend the $12. It's nothing. If it's the same price as buying a cup of coffee and a second cup of coffee for someone that you like at the office, or maybe your significant other, go do it. Go support good work.
For sure. Yeah. NoCeilingsNBA.com. Go get yourself a draft guide. Follow me on Twitter at Boundboards. Follow No Ceilings NBA. We're doing this year round. We love the draft. This is our thing. We're deep in the weeds. We're going to be doing content this off season too. So stick around. We're around all year.
Let's get weird. Thank you so much for coming on. Big thanks to everyone that tuned in live on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Click that notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chasedown's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of the review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.